The sun peeked over the ridge of the Blue Ridge Mountains, casting a warm glow over our small town of Maplewood. It was the kind of morning that promised peace and quiet. Birds chirped their morning songs. The breeze carried the scent of blooming honeysuckles, weaving through the neighborhood like an invisible thread of calm. My little corner of Maplewood was the picture of tranquility. That is, until Karen moved in next door. Karen, the HOA president, self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's sanctity. Her house was immaculate, a shrine to rules and order. With its perfectly trimmed hedges and perpetually green, manicured lawn, her presence was like a hawk circling overhead, always watching, always judging. The first signs of Karen's meticulous nature were subtle. A note left on my doorstep, scrawled in neat cursive, reminding me of the HOA's regulations about trash can placement. A gentle nudge, a warning shot across the bow. I smiled, folded the note neatly, and tucked it away. I had no intention of engaging in a feud. Let her have her moment. Days passed. The sun baked the ground, and life continued its gentle rhythm. But Karen was relentless in her pursuit of perfection. A few stray leaves in my yard would prompt another note. This time, with an annotated map of my property and the offending foliage circled. It was almost impressive how much effort she put into such trivial matters. My brother, Jack, would have laughed. Jack, the sheriff, with his broad shoulders and broader smile, was well acquainted with Karen's antics. He'd been the one to warn me when she moved in. "Keep your head down," he'd said, with a twinkle in his eye. "Or you'll end up on her list." I had chuckled, dismissing it as sibling banter. How wrong I was. Time went on. More notes appeared, each more insistent than the last. I took them in stride, my resolve rooted deep like the old oak tree in my backyard. Karen's letters were a storm, but I was the mountain, unmoved and unyielding. My quiet life continued. Her attempts at control were but whispers in the wind. Yet, her patience waned. Her messages grew bolder, louder. She began to patrol the street like a sentry, alert to any deviation from her rigid expectations. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, would scan my property each morning as she collected her mail, looking for infractions like a lioness on the hunt. Then came the morning. I found her standing at the edge of my yard, arms crossed. I had been tending my garden, coaxing life from the soil with the tender care of a parent. Her presence was an intrusion on my sanctuary, but I met her gaze with calm, refusing to bow to her silent demands. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Her mouth opened, but the expected tirade did not spill forth. Instead, a single sentence, clipped and precise, a declaration rather than a conversation. "You've been reported to the authorities." A statement that hung in the air like smoke. I pondered the irony. Little did she know. The sheriff was my brother. I offered a simple nod, acknowledging her presence and her words, but not her authority. Inside, though, a spark ignited. This could be interesting. Karen turned and left, her shoes tapping a brisk staccato on the pavement. Her retreat signaled the end of Act 1, a silent curtain falling on the first chapter of our unspoken war. I watched her go, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. The stage was set, and the players were in position. Whatever came next, I was ready. The sun had barely nudged itself over the horizon when the first sign appeared on my lawn. "Unauthorized holiday decorations will be removed." It read, an imperious font declaring war against my autumn wreath. Below, in smaller letters, the signature that had become all too familiar. Karen, president of the HOA. This was the beginning, the first arrow released in the volley of her campaign. My wreath, a simple circle of faux leaves and tiny pumpkins, was deemed a criminal by her arbitrary decree. I smiled at the thought. An outlaw wreath, in a world of plastic bin tedium, it seemed a small rebellion. The neighborhood's quiet was deceptive, a calm surface hiding the roiling undercurrents of life governed by Karen's iron grip. Her penchant for control was legendary, manifesting in the most ridiculous of mandates. Once, she had tried to ban garden gnomes, citing visual pollution. That still made me chuckle in disbelief. This wreath episode, though, was different. It felt personal. I left the sign standing, a monument to her absurdity, and headed to my car. But there it was, a ticket flapping under the windshield wiper like a trapped bird. Violation of parking regulations. It read, a fine scrawled with indignation. My crime parking half an inch past the designated line. I shook my head, tossing the paper onto the passenger seat. The drive to the office was filled with my own silent musings. Karen's escalation was relentless. Her strategy seemed to be death by 1,000 paper cuts. But in this small town, I had my own quiet power, resting in the form of my brother, the sheriff. The irony wasn't lost on me. I laughed, a sound that felt like an old friend visiting. The office was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the outside world's pettiness couldn't touch me. Yet, there were whispers, hints of Karen's influence creeping in like a cold draft. Her gossip, spun with the skill of a seasoned spider, weaving webs of half-truths. Did you hear about the wreath? I heard she parks like that on purpose. They were snippets of conversations I caught, like stray leaves blowing into the hallway. My colleagues' eyes would flicker to me, a mix of pity and curiosity. They waited for a reaction, but I gave none. There was power in silence, in letting the storm rage while you remained steadfast, unshaken. Returning home, the wreath stood its ground, unblemished by her attempts. A small victory, but as night fell, so did a chill. I knew Karen's type. She thrived on conflict. Her need to control was insatiable, and her tactics would only grow bolder. Then it happened, a single line uttered through clenched teeth as we passed each other on the street. Her voice was low, laced with venom and the threat of further escalation. I'll make sure you're sorry. I felt the weight of her words, but they didn't crush me. Instead, they fueled a quiet resolve. Let her weave her webs. Let her cast her stones. I had my own strength, my own quiet network of support. As I sat on my porch, watching the stars blink into existence, I realized the irony of it all. Karen, in her pursuit of power, had underestimated the one thing she couldn't control: the human spirit, my spirit. And behind my calm exterior, plans were forming. Plans Karen would never see coming. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of our pristine neighborhood. I watched the light slanting through the blinds, scattering stripes across the polished hardwood floor. My laptop hummed quietly beside me, its screen filled with a meticulous collection of time-stamped emails, incident reports, and the ever-growing list of HOA regulations. Karen's self-appointed reign of terror had left a trail, and I had been documenting every step since her vendetta had begun. There was something almost therapeutic about organizing chaos into a neat sequence of evidence. Each document was a tile in the mosaic of Karen's overreach, the petty infractions, the reprimanding notes left on windshields, the unsolicited advice on lawn maintenance. Each piece played its part in the larger picture of her compulsive need for control. And perhaps fear. Fear of losing the power she clutched so tightly. Her latest stunt had crossed a line, attempting to have me arrested for a violation I hadn't committed. She had wielded her influence like a blunt instrument, but she didn't know the sheriff's office was a familiar place for me. Not because of any criminal intrigue, but because my brother held the badge. When the call came, it was a test of restraint for both of us. I sat quietly that evening, the air dense with anticipation. My brother had been discreet, professionalism tempered with familial loyalty. "This one's on you," he had said, a smirk in his voice, the kind that spoke volumes of unspoken support. It was a singular line that carried the weight of 1,000 possible interventions. each one restrained by the bonds of brotherhood and justice. With documentation in hand, my subtle counter unfolded. The HOA board meeting was an unassuming setting for a revelation, an arena where Karen's dominance was rarely challenged. I arrived early, the soft murmur of evening discussions punctuating the stillness of the room. The board members shuffled in, each carrying their own preoccupations, unaware of the quiet storm brewing in their midst. Karen sat at the head of the table, the queen upon her throne of paper and rules. Her eyes flicked to me, a spark of recognition, or perhaps a premonition, darting across her face. I returned her gaze with calm detachment, a predator disguised as prey in the dimly lit chamber. When the time came, I unfolded my narrative with the care of a craftsman unveiling his masterpiece. Each piece of evidence spoke for itself, a crescendo of facts that peeled back the veneer of Karen's authority. The room was silent, riveted by the unfolding drama. It was not the exposé of her cruelty that stung, but the revelation of her vulnerability. Her desperate grasp at control laid bare for all to see. Her face faltered beneath the fluorescent glow, the mask slipping as the board absorbed the extent of her machinations. It was not the victory of a coup, but the quiet satisfaction of truth-dispelling illusion. The meeting concluded with the murmur of reassessment, the board's whispers, a soft chorus of change. As I stepped into the cool night air, the scent of possibility mingled with the crisp autumn breeze. Karen remained behind, her silhouette framed against the window, a solitary figure wrapped in the realization of her diminished realm. A soft smile played at the corners of my lips, a silent acknowledgement of the balance restored. In the end, it was not the wielding of power that triumphed, but the quiet persistence of justice. The air was thick with more than just the sweltering midsummer heat. Whispers hung in the breeze, a chorus of curious neighbors piecing together the puzzle of Karen's crusade against me. Suburbia, with its manicured lawns and pristine driveways, had become a quiet battleground. The HOA meeting was set for the following week, but its shadow loomed large, casting a long line of anticipation, like a storm waiting to break. Karen, in her infinite wisdom, had ramped up her campaign. She paraded through the neighborhood with a clipboard clutched like a scepter, her eyes gleaming with a righteous fire. Her hair bobbed, a signal of her unwavering determination. She had gathered signatures, a cohort of the concerned, swayed by her tales of my transgressions, fences left unpainted, lawns not trimmed to HOA standards, fabricated tales spun with the skill of an artisan. Yet, beneath her bravado, her veneer of control was cracking. A spiderweb of doubt spread across her face when she thought no one was watching. I watched her from my window, the glass a thin barrier separating my world from her crusade. The irony was almost palpable. My brother, ever the silent sentinel, assured me that there was nothing to fear. "Law's on your side," he'd said, his words a gentle balm against her storm. She would pass my house daily, her gaze lingering on my garden as if it held the secrets to her undoing. In her quest to maintain order, she had become a harbinger of chaos. I found humor in it, an irony sharp enough to draw blood. The neighbors, once indifferent rouse, had started to notice. Her hawk-like vigilance was now a spectacle, a sideshow in the grand circus of our lives. Amidst the tension, my garden thrived. Blossoms erupted in defiance of her scrutiny, a vibrant tapestry of rebellion. Nature, in its wisdom, ignored the pettiness of human squabbles. The bees danced from flower to flower, their obliviousness a comfort. Life went on, indifferent to the storms of men. The neighborhood barbecues, once lively and laced with laughter, had turned into cautious gatherings where glances were exchanged like currency. Conversations were measured, each word weighed carefully. The air crackled with unspoken words and tense smiles. Karen had become the uninvited guest. Her presence felt even in absence. Then came the day when the storm finally broke. A quiet Sunday morning shattered by a loud thump outside. I peered through the curtains, heart pounding. A sign, haphazardly erected, claimed my lawn was in violation of multiple HOA regulations. It was a final act of desperation, a gauntlet thrown down with all the subtlety of a hammer. In the quiet that followed, I stepped outside, the morning sun warming my skin. The sign was ridiculous in its audacity, a totem of Karen's fervor. The neighborhood watched with bated breath, like spectators at a grand finale. And there she stood, across the street. Her eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, the world held its breath. This was her final gambit, her last stand. I smiled, a small, knowing smile, the kind that spoke volumes more than words ever could. In that moment, it was clear I had already won. The cicadas had begun their evening chorus as I sat on my porch, the warm light of the setting sun casting long shadows over the manicured lawns of our neighborhood. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the dull hum of distant lawnmowers, a serene contradiction to the storm brewing beneath the surface of my life. Karen's games had reached a fever pitch. Her latest stunt, trying to have me arrested over some imagined slight, had almost been amusing. If not for its sheer audacity, she hadn't counted on my brother, the sheriff, knowing better than to fall for the same tired tricks she'd used on others. She hadn't realized that our connection wasn't just familial, but forged in the fires of a childhood spent fending off bullies much like her. We were carved from the same resilient stone, and she'd underestimated us both. Her world was one of control and illusion, carefully maintained through the veneer of authority granted by the HOA. Her power was paper-thin, reliant on fear and compliance. I decided it was time for a different approach, a quiet dismantling rather than a loud confrontation. So the key was not in direct confrontation, but in the subtle, steady application of truth. Armed with documentation, I had spent nights poring over HOA bylaws, cross-referencing every complaint, every fine, every petty rule that Karen had twisted to her advantage. I was a silent architect, constructing a case one tedious detail at a time. Her violations were glaring once you knew where to look. Misuse of funds, selective enforcement, and a web of deceit spun so carelessly it was a wonder it hadn't collapsed under its own weight sooner. My brother had been discreet, using his position not to intimidate, but to gather information. It was amazing what people would say when they thought no one was listening, especially in a town where everyone assumed they knew your business. He'd found allies where I hadn't expected. Neighbors who had long since grown tired of Karen's reign but lacked the means or the courage to speak up. Together, we formed a quiet coalition, bonded over late-night coffee and shared exasperation. The plan unfolded with the precision of a watchmaker, a letter to the state HOA board, meticulously detailed and backed by irrefutable evidence. It was not a storm, but a tide, relentless and inevitable. Karen's own rules, used against her with a gentle ferocity she'd never anticipated. As I waited for the response, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Karen, oblivious to the gathering storm, continued her usual rounds, clipboard in hand, ticking off infractions with the satisfaction of a tyrant secure in her domain. But change was in the air, an undercurrent she failed to notice. Then, the letter arrived, an official investigation into the HOA's practices, a spotlight on the shadowy corners Karen had so carefully cultivated. The power dynamics shifted subtly, like the first cool breeze before a thunderstorm. It was not revenge, it was justice, quietly served. I watched from my porch as Karen received her own letter, her face a portrait of disbelief crumbling into anger. The paper trembled in her hands, words blurring as the reality sank in. She glanced around, and for a moment, our eyes met across the street. In that instant, I saw the mask slip, vulnerability seeping through cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The cicadas continued their song, oblivious to the human drama playing out beneath their timeless symphony. I leaned back, the chair creaking softly, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. There was no need for victory laps or gloating. The wheel of justice had turned. Slow, but certain. Karen retreated into her house, the door closing with a finality that echoed down the quiet street. Peace settled in the wake of her retreat. The balance restored not by force, but by the simple power of truth. And as the stars began to prick the sky, I knew that this was an ending and a beginning. The quiet triumph of right over unearned rule. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting familiar stripes across the living room floor. The warmth felt like a silent reassurance that some things remained untouched by chaos. I sipped my coffee slowly, the aroma mingling with the quiet satisfaction that today promised resolution. Yesterday's echoes were still vivid. Karen's voice had risen like a storm, full of accusations and unyielding blame. Her threats had hung in the air, heavy and sharp. She had insisted on an arrest, her eyes gleaming with a misguided sense of victory. Yet, when my brother stepped in uniformed, calm, exuding authority from every pore her bravado dimmed, that moment was seared into my memory. A tableau of irony that no script could have better crafted. I set my cup down, allowing the clink to break the room's silence. The community meeting was today, the one where everything would unravel, the one where Karen would face the seeds she had sown, no longer able to hide behind her veneer of control. The drive to the community center was a procession of thoughts. Each intersection and stoplight mirrored decisions, paths taken and untaken. My brother had been a pillar, protecting and guiding without smothering. Our bond was a testament to shared histories and unspoken understandings. I felt a surge of gratitude for him, for his balance of justice and kindness. The parking lot was already filling, cars parked in neat rows, their owners clustering in small groups. The air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that grips a crowd on the precipice of revelation. Karen was there, her posture rigid, a thread of defiance still woven into her stance. But the usual entourage of supporters seemed thinner, their expressions more cautious, less assured. Inside, the hall was a symphony of murmurs and shifting chairs. I took my place, observing the familiar faces, each etched with their own stories. The board members sat at the front, a collective of decision-makers now faced with the consequences of their complicity. As the meeting began, the tone was set with a somberness that belied the drama beneath. Voices rose and fell, discussing community matters with a veneer of normalcy, but the undercurrent was unmistakable, a current that would soon surface. When Karen's turn came, the room stilled. Her words were polished, crafted with the precision of someone who believed in their own narrative. Yet, the more she spoke, the more the facade cracked. Accusations without evidence, complaints without merit. The room listened, a collective patience wearing thin. Then, my brother stood. His presence was a quiet thunder, commanding and calm. He spoke not of arrests or transgressions, but of community, of the fabric that bound us all. His words were a tapestry of logic and compassion, unraveling Karen's narrative thread by thread. He revealed truths that were indisputable, facts that shone light into the shadows of her claims. The silence that followed was profound. Realization settled over the room like a gentle rain, washing away doubt and fear. Eyes turned to Karen, but her once imperious demeanor had wilted. Her power was no longer a scepter, but a fragile thing, crumbling under the weight of truth. In that quiet aftermath, the community began to stir. Conversations sparked, bridges rebuilt with newfound understanding. There was no need for declarations or apologies. The shift was organic, a return to equilibrium. As the meeting adjourned, I felt a deep-seated peace, the kind that comes when justice isn't a punishment, but a restoration. I caught my brother's eye, and he nodded, an unspoken promise of solidarity. Karen lingered, now a ghost of her former self, sidelined by the very principles she'd wielded like weapons. The irony was rich, almost poetic. Outside, the sun was bright, unhindered by clouds or conflict. I walked to my car. The future an open road. The community was restored, its pulse steady and strong. And as I drove away, I knew that some lessons, though hard-earned, were worth every moment of struggle.